A corporate titan in a bespoke suit offered him a blank check for his land. She did not know the land held the only proof that could destroy her entire company. The car was a whisper of engineering, a blade of silver slicing through the green quiet of the valley. Inside, Elara Vance felt the vibration not in the chassis, but in her teeth. It was the irritation of a world that refused to move at her speed. The asphalt had surrendered to gravel 2 miles back. Gravel had now surrendered to dirt and ruts that clawed at the expensive undercarriage of her vehicle. She was a creature of the city, of glass towers and frictionless transactions. This place was all friction. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something vaguely like hay. It clung to the recycled fabric of her ethically sourced, brutally expensive suit. Her objective was a single parcel of land, a stubborn square on a map that was holding up a billion-dollar data center project. A green project. The irony was not lost on her, driving a machine of processed lithium through a landscape that was aggressively, inconveniently green. The project was her legacy. Her ascension to the throne her father had built was complete, but a legacy required a monument. This data center, powered by geothermal and cooled by the valley's deep aquifers, was to be hers. The final landowner was a man named Liam Cole. The file described him as a recluse, unmarried, 1 child, no leverage. Elara viewed people as systems of logic. Find the input, dictate the output. Every person had a price, a weakness, or a desire that could be converted into a signature on a dotted line. A sharp crack, followed by a sickening hiss, interrupted her strategic analysis. The car lurched, its sophisticated warning system screaming a litany of failures in a calm, synthesized voice. She guided the dying machine to the side of the narrow track. Silence descended. It was a heavy, unfamiliar thing. She stepped out, her sharp heels sinking immediately into the soft earth. The rear tire was savaged, a piece of rusted metal protruding from the rubber like a broken tooth. There was no signal on her phone. Of course, there was not. From down the track, a shape emerged from the heat haze. A man. He walked with a steady, unhurried gait, carrying a length of cedar on one shoulder. He was dressed in worn denim and a plain grey shirt darkened with sweat. Sawdust clung to his hair and the lines around his eyes. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze taking in the car, the tire, and finally her. His eyes were the color of the slate sky before a storm. They held no surprise, no deference. She felt a prickle of annoyance. This was him. This was the obstacle. She immediately shifted into her default mode of operation. Control. I seem to have had some trouble. He said nothing. His silence was not empty. It was evaluative. She was a problem that had appeared on his road. He was deciding what kind of problem she was. I need assistance. I am, of course, willing to compensate you for your time. He looked from the tire back to her face. Land does not rush. The words were quiet, a simple statement of fact. They were also a clear dismissal of her entire worldview. She resisted the urge to check the time on her watch. Are you Liam Cole? He nodded, shifting the weight of the lumber. My name is Elara Vance. She offered the name like a key, expecting a lock to turn. Recognition. Respect. Nothing. I am here to discuss the sale of your property. I believe our offer was more than generous. It is not for sale. Everything is for sale, Mr. Cole. It is simply a matter of finding the correct price. She produced a checkbook from her briefcase, a theatrical gesture she had used to close 100 deals. Name your number. He looked at the small leather book in her hand. He looked at the silver pen she held ready. Then he walked past her to the wounded car. He knelt, his hands examining the damage with a practiced economy of motion. You cannot drive on this. You will ruin the wheel. That much is obvious. Can you fix it? I can change it. He gestured to the car's trunk. If you have a spare. She did. She watched as he worked. His movements were efficient, precise. He handled the tools with a familiarity that spoke of a life spent fixing things, not just owning them. There was a competence in his hands that she understood, even if the context was alien to her. It was the same focused energy she applied to a hostile takeover. The thought was unsettling. As he tightened the last lug nut, he spoke without looking at her. The offer was not generous. It was an insult. It was 4 times the assessed market value. You assessed the land. You did not assess its value. He stood, wiping his hands on a rag from his back pocket. She was ready to argue, to escalate, to bring the immense weight of her corporation to bear on this single stubborn man. But he turned to her, and his expression had changed. There was something other than quiet resistance in his eyes now. It was a flicker of old grief. You are his daughter. She paused. His. My father? He nodded slowly. Edward Vance. He used to come out here. Before. Her father had died over a decade ago. A sudden heart attack, the doctors said, a life of stress. She had been in business school, already honing the skills that would allow her to take his place. She remembered him as a giant, a man who smelled of cigars and ambition. She did not remember him as a man who visited valleys. Liam Cole walked to the weathered porch of the farmhouse she had barely noticed. He disappeared inside and returned a moment later. He was holding something, an old leather-bound journal, its corners soft with wear. He held it out to her. This is yours. My wife, Sarah, she kept it for him, for safekeeping. Elara took the journal. The leather was warm, almost alive. It felt heavier than it should. She looked at the man. The problem. The obstacle. He was no longer just a square on a map. He was a loose thread in the tightly woven narrative of her life. And she had the sudden, terrifying feeling that if she pulled it, everything might unravel. Section. The city was a fortress of familiar noise and light. Elara sat in her office, a glass box suspended 50 stories above the grid of streets. The journal lay on her desk, a relic from another world. It was an anomaly on the sterile expanse of polished black granite. Her world was digital, immediate and disposable. This object was analog, patient, and permanent. She had not opened it yet. First, she needed data. Anya Sharma, her chief counsel and the only person Elara trusted implicitly, stood before the desk. Anya was sharp, loyal, and moved through the digital world like a shark through water. Liam Cole. He is a ghost. Anya placed a tablet on the desk. Its screen was mostly white space. No social media, no credit score to speak of, no digital footprint for the last 8 years. He pays his property taxes in person, with cash. Before that, Anya tapped the screen. An old article appeared. Liam Cole, lead forensic accountant for a top-tier firm. He was a hunter. He tracked missing millions through the tangled jungles of corporate finance. He was legendary. Then he vanished. What happened? His wife died. Anya's voice was softer now. Sarah Cole, environmental scientist. A single vehicle accident on a rural road, not far from his property, 8 years ago. Elara looked from the tablet to the journal. A forensic accountant and an environmental scientist, living in the middle of nowhere. It was a puzzle, and Elara hated puzzles she did not create herself. Find out what Sarah Cole was working on before she died. Anya nodded, already typing into her phone as she left the office. Left alone, Elara finally reached for the journal. She opened it. The pages smelled of old paper and cedar. It was her father's handwriting, bold, decisive, impatient. But the words were not his, not the man she knew. There were no stock prices, no market projections. There were drawings of leaves, detailed notes on soil composition, observations about the migration patterns of local birds, and then, tucked between a sketch of a wildflower and a note about water tables, a recurring word, avum. It was a project code name, one of her father's. It had been shelved right before he died, a failed venture. Beneath the word, a short, cryptic sentence. They are poisoning the well to sell the water. Most people only see what is flowering. They miss what is moving underneath. Her hand closed around the page hard enough to crease it. This was not a diary. It was a warning. Days later, she drove back to the valley. She told the board it was a final, personal attempt at negotiation, a demonstration of her commitment. She told herself it was due diligence. She knew both were lies. She found him not at the house, but by a creek that cut through the back of his property. He was with a little girl, his daughter, Maya. She was perhaps 6 or 7, with her father's serious eyes and a tangle of dark hair. They were building a small dam of stones and mud. Liam looked up as she approached. He did not seem surprised to see her. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement. The girl, Maya, stopped her work and stared at Elara. She stared at the severe lines of Elara's suit, the sharp point of her shoes, the tightly controlled discipline of her hair. Elara was not accustomed to being scrutinized by children. They were, in her experience, a chaotic and inefficient variable. Maya walked over to her. She held out a small, flat, grey stone. It was smooth from the creek water. For you. Elara looked at the stone in the girl's small, muddy hand. It was a gift, an offering with no clause, no expectation of return. It was the most confusing transaction she had engaged in all year. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. The stone was cool and solid in her palm. Thank you. The words felt strange in her own mouth. Maya gave a small, solemn nod, then turned and ran back to her father. Liam watched the exchange, his expression unreadable. He looked at Elara, then at the stone in her hand. She likes things that are real. Elara closed her hand around the stone. She had come here for answers, for leverage. She had received a rock from a child, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt the yawning gap between the price of things and their value. Section. The call came as she was driving back toward the city limits. The name on the screen was Marcus Thorne. It appeared in sharp, bloodless letters. Marcus was a predator of the old school, a man who had served on her father's board and now watched Elara's every move with a patient, reptilian hunger. He considered her father's chair to be his birthright. Elara, my dear. His voice was a smooth blend of condescension and feigned concern. I heard you were out in the wilderness again, communing with the locals. I am handling a sensitive acquisition personally, Marcus. A personal touch can be so inefficient. Let the lawyers handle the stubborn farmer. That is what they are for, to apply pressure. We have a timeline to maintain. His concern was for the project. His threat was for her. Any delay would be framed as her failure, her weakness. The situation is under control. Of course it is. Just a friendly word of advice. Do not let sentiment get in the way of progress. Your father understood that. The line went dead. It was not advice. It was a move on the board. He was positioning his pieces. 2 days later, the attack came. It was not aimed at her directly. It was aimed at Liam. Anya called, her voice tight with urgency. They have filed an injunction. Marcus went over your head. He used the emergency infrastructure clause. They are claiming eminent domain. It is aggressive. It is a lie. The data center was not critical infrastructure. It was a commercial enterprise, but the lie was wrapped in enough legal jargon to bog Liam Cole down for years, to bleed him dry. It was a corporate garrote. Elara saw the strategy with perfect, sickening clarity. Marcus was not just trying to get the land. He was testing her, forcing her to either side with the company's brutal tactics against a lone man or to oppose them and appear weak to the board. She drove. She did not know where she was going until she saw the turnoff for the valley. She found Liam repairing a fence near the road. A county sheriff's car was just pulling away. The officer behind the wheel had the decency to not meet her eyes. Liam held a sheaf of papers in his hand. He did not need to tell her what they were. His face was calm, but the quiet in his eyes had hardened into something colder, something she recognized. It was the look of a man preparing for a long war. "This is your company." It was not a question. "It is a faction within my company. A faction you lead. No, a faction I am meant to control." He looked down at the legal papers, a declaration of war from her world delivered into his. "They think I'm a farmer." He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw the forensic accountant, the hunter. "They assume I do not know how to read the fine print. They assume I will break." She saw the cold, impersonal power of her corporation, the beast she commanded, being turned on this man and his daughter, on the memory of his wife, and she felt a schism within herself, a tearing away of the person she was from the person she might have to become. The phone rang again. "Anya, there is more. Marcus has planted a story. It is hitting the wire services now, a business journal. The headline was brutal. Luddite landowner holds state's green future hostage. It painted Liam as a backwards fool, an enemy of progress. It painted Elara as the embattled CEO, struggling to bring prosperity against mindless opposition. It was a perfect piece of corporate propaganda, and it was a trap designed to isolate them both. She ended the call. The valley was silent around them. The air smelled of approaching rain. "This is not about the land, is it?" Liam's voice was low. He was looking at her, really looking at her, seeing past the suit and the title. No, it never was. The threat was no longer abstract. It had substance now, a weight in the air. When Elara returned to her parking garage in the city, she found the two front tires of her car slashed. There was no note. There did not need to be. It was a message from Marcus, a reminder of the crude, physical world that underpinned their sophisticated corporate battles. Anya's voice over the phone was strained. He is consolidating support on the board. He is using the project delay, the lawsuit. He is framing this as your failure to control the narrative. Elara, you are becoming isolated. Elara looked at her reflection in the darkened window of her office. The woman looking back was a fortress, impeccably designed, heavily armed, and completely alone. She felt a sudden, desperate need for something solid, something real, like a smooth grey stone from a creek. She drove back to the valley. She told no one where she was going. She was not a CEO seeking to close a deal. She was a person seeking clarity, and the only place she could think to find it was in the heart of the problem. Halfway there, the sky broke. The rain was not the tame, orderly rain of the city. It was a wild, torrential thing. It turned the dirt track into a river of mud. A fallen tree blocked the road ahead. Behind her, the sound of sliding earth. The road was gone. She was stranded. She sat in the car for a long time as the storm raged, the world reduced to the drumming on the roof and the sweep of the wipers. She was trapped, powerless. It was a novel and deeply unpleasant sensation. A light cut through the deluge. Liam's old truck, moving with a slow, steady confidence through the chaos. He pulled up alongside her. He did not ask if she needed help. He simply opened the passenger door. "Get in." The farmhouse was an island of warmth and light. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. The air smelled of wood smoke and coffee. Maya was asleep on the sofa, a half-finished drawing of a horse clutched in her hand. For the next 2 days, the storm kept the valley locked down. The power went out. The world shrank to the dimensions of the small house. Forced proximity. Elara shed the layers of her corporate identity. The suit was replaced by a borrowed sweater that smelled of cedar. The phone was a useless brick. She watched him. She saw the rhythm of his life, the way he moved through the house with a quiet purpose. The way he mended a broken chair in his workshop, his hands sure and patient. The way he spoke to his daughter, his voice a low murmur that was both gentle and absolute. This was not a life of quiet desperation. It was a life of deliberate construction. He had built it piece by piece from the wreckage of another. On the second night, the storm had quieted to a steady drumming on the roof. Maya was in bed. They sat in the near darkness, the fire casting long shadows on the walls. Elara held the leather journal in her hands. "Avum," she said the word into the quiet. What was it? Liam stared into the fire for a long time before he spoke. It was the name of the project my wife was working on. With your father. His voice was flat, scraped clean of emotion. Sarah was a scientist. She believed in data. She believed the truth was always there, in the soil, in the water. You just had to know how to look for it. He paused. The data center you want to build, it is on the same site. They called it something else then. A pilot program for industrial waste disposal, run by a subsidiary controlled by Marcus Thorne. Elara felt a cold dread crystallize in her stomach. My father hired Sarah to do an independent environmental impact study. A formality, he said. But your father was a man who appreciated due diligence. He found things. Sarah found things. The soil was contaminated. Arsenic, lead, chemical solvents. They were not disposing of the waste. They were just burying it, leaching into the aquifer, poisoning the well to sell the water. The words from the journal. My father knew. He was beginning to. Sarah's daughter was undeniable. He was preparing to expose it, to expose Marcus. He had a heart attack on his way to a meeting with the Attorney General. Elara's world tilted on its axis. The neat, tragic story of her father's death was a lie, a carefully constructed fiction. And Sarah, she would not let it go. Liam's voice was barely a whisper now. She had her own copies of the data. She was going to meet a journalist. A truck lost its brakes on a clear, dry day. The police report said it was an accident. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the dark, wet night. I do not believe in accidents. The alliance was no longer a matter of strategy. It was a matter of necessity, of justice. Elara looked at the man whose life her company had destroyed. She looked at the journal of the father she never really knew. She was standing in the wreckage of 2 families, and the architect of it all was trying to steal her company. She would not let that happen. She would burn him to the ground. The storm passed. The world outside the farmhouse windows was washed clean, glistening and new. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of the past. Elara now understood the journal. The botanical notes were not a hobby. They were a map. The sketches of specific trees, the notes on soil acidity. Her father and Sarah were marking the locations of the worst contamination. They were creating a key, hidden in plain sight. Liam had more. He took her to his workshop, a place that smelled of sawdust and oil. From a locked chest beneath his workbench, he pulled out a series of boxes. Sarah kept everything: soil samples in sealed bags, water tests, printouts of geological surveys. It was a mountain of circumstantial evidence, enough to prove the contamination, but not enough to prove Marcus Thorne ordered a cover-up, not enough to prove murder. The one thing that tied it all together is missing. Liam's voice was heavy. Sarah's final report. It had everything. Financial records I helped her trace, showing payments from the subsidiary to a shell corporation owned by the disposal company. And a recording. She was paranoid. She recorded a phone call with Marcus. He threatened her, told her to back off, told her some things are better left buried. Where is it? I do not know. The day of the accident, she told me she gave the most important piece to someone for safekeeping. Someone she trusted more than anyone. She never told me who. A name surfaced in Elara's mind, a memory from Anya's research file. An old local man, a friend of Sarah's family, who had co-signed the original deed for the coal property. Silas Blackwood. Silas lived in a small, neat cabin on the other side of the valley. He was a man who seemed to be carved from the landscape itself, his face a road map of long years and quiet observation. He was a retired surveyor, a man who understood the land, not just what was on it, but what was in it. They found him on his porch, oiling a beautiful, long, obsolete transit. He watched them approach, his eyes missing nothing. Liam made the introductions. Elara simply stood, feeling like an intruder. Silas looked at her for a long time. You have your father's eyes, but not his patience. He gestured for them to sit. He did not ask why they were there. He seemed to know. Liam spoke, his voice quiet, recounting the story, the journal, the missing report. Silas listened without interruption, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. When Liam finished, the old man nodded slowly. Sarah was a smart girl, smarter than all of them. She knew that men like Thorne only understand one kind of language. He rose and went inside his cabin. The silence stretched. Elara could hear her own heart beating. Everything rested on this. Silas returned carrying a small, heavy box made of steel. It looked like an old ammunition case. He placed it on the table between them. She gave this to me the morning it happened. She said if anything happened to her, I was to wait for the right person to ask the right question. He looked at Elara. I believe you are that person. Liam opened the box. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was a small hard drive and a single sealed envelope. Elara's name was written on it in Sarah's elegant script. Her hand trembled as she opened it. The letter was short. It was a direct appeal. It spoke of her father's courage, his desire to do the right thing. It spoke of Marcus Thorne's greed, and it ended with a simple, devastating sentence. Your father believed you would finish what he started. Please do not prove him wrong. This was the smoking gun. The key. Elara looked up from the letter. Her path was no longer cloudy. It was a straight, hard line. She was no longer just the CEO. She was her father's daughter, and Sarah's chosen instrument of justice. She turned to Liam. Her voice was cold, precise, and full of a purpose she had never felt before. I am calling a board meeting. This will not be a lawsuit. It will be a corporate execution, and you are going to be there to witness it. The boardroom was a theater of power. A long mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen reflected the cold, recessed lighting. The air was climate-controlled and smelled of money. It was Elara's natural habitat, a place where she had won a dozen victories. Today felt different. She was not there to conquer. She was there to cleanse. The board members filed in, men and a few women in identical dark suits. They were restless, summoned to an emergency meeting with no agenda. Their discomfort was a small, satisfying appetizer. Marcus Thorne entered last. He was smiling. It was a victor's smile, predatory and confident. He believed this meeting was his coronation, the final act in his long campaign to oust her. He gave her a small, condescending nod as he took his seat opposite her. At the back of the room, near the door, stood Liam. He was not in his work clothes. He wore a simple, dark jacket and trousers. He did not look like a farmer. He looked like what he was, a man who had lost everything, standing as a silent, unmovable witness. His presence unsettled the room. He was a variable they could not account for. Elara stood at the head of the table. She did not use the podium. She did not use a slideshow. She held a single file folder. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Her voice was calm, devoid of the tension that crackled in the air. "I called this meeting to discuss the future of this company, to discuss its legacy." Marcus leaned back in his chair, a look of amused tolerance on his face. "Elara, if this is about the data center project, we can assure you the board is prepared to take decisive action to move forward." His words were aimed at her but spoken to the room, a demonstration of his control. "This is not about the data center." She paused, letting the silence hang. "It is about a project that preceded it. Codename Avum." A flicker of something in Marcus's eyes, the first crack in the confident facade. She saw it. Everyone saw it. She opened the folder. She began not with data, but with a story. About her father. About his belief in due diligence, in corporate responsibility. She laid out the history of the Avum project. The subsidiary. The disposal contract. Then she laid the unredacted environmental reports on the polished table. Page after page of damning data, authored by Sarah Cole. The name fell into the room like a stone into a still pond. Liam did not move, but his presence seemed to grow, to fill the space behind them. "This is ancient history, Elara." Marcus's voice was tight, a tragic accident. The company was cleared of all wrongdoing. Was it? Elara looked directly at him now. Or was the evidence simply buried? From a small digital recorder connected to the room's audio system, she played the recording. Sarah Cole's voice filled the silent room. Clear, professional, afraid. Followed by Marcus Thorne's voice. Younger but unmistakable. Arrogant, dismissive, menacing. "Some things are better left buried, Sarah. For everyone's sake. You should think about your family." The click of the call ending echoed in the tomb-like silence. Marcus Thorne was the color of ash. His smile was gone. His power was gone. He was just a man, exposed and hollowed out. The board members, predators themselves, smelled the blood in the water. They did not look at Elara. They looked at Marcus, and their faces were masks of cold, pragmatic fury. Not at his crime, but at his carelessness, at the monumental liability he had just become. Elara closed the folder. "The data center project is cancelled, effective immediately. Instead, the corporation will fund a comprehensive, multi-decade environmental cleanup of the entire valley. It will be managed by an independent trust. The trust will be named the Sarah Cole Foundation." She did not need to call for a vote to remove Marcus. It was already happening in the silent, furious glances being exchanged around the table. Security entered the room. They had been waiting outside. Anya's final, perfect touch. They stood by Marcus's chair. He did not resist. He rose, his movements stiff, his gaze fixed on nothing. As he was escorted out, his eyes met Elara's for a brief second. She saw no remorse, only the shock of a king who had been checkmated by a pawn he had long since forgotten. When he was gone, Elara looked to the back of the room. Liam met her gaze. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was not forgiveness. It was not thanks. It was acknowledgement, an ending, and a beginning. The weeks that followed were a controlled demolition of her old life. Elara Vance resigned as chief executive officer. The announcement sent a shockwave through the financial world, but she felt nothing. It was like shrugging off a heavy coat she had not realized she was wearing. She sold the penthouse, the glass box in the sky. She sold the silver car, the silent blade. She liquidated assets, converting years of relentless acquisition into a vast, liquid sum. A significant portion of it went to seed the Sarah Cole Foundation. The rest she set aside. She did not know what for. Anya handled the transition with her customary quiet efficiency. "Are you sure about this?" Anya had asked, standing amidst the packing crates in the empty penthouse. "I have never been more sure of anything." Her new vehicle was a truck. Not new. Slightly dented, utterly reliable. She paid for it in cash. She drove north, away from the city with the windows down. The air that rushed in was no longer an intrusion. It was a welcome thing. She took the turnoff into the valley. The road was familiar now. The ruts in the dirt felt like a homecoming. She saw him from a distance. He was by the fence line that bordered the road, the same one he had been working on before. He was replacing a rotted post. He looked up as her truck approached. He straightened, wiping a hand on his jeans. There was no surprise in his eyes. It was the quiet acceptance of a man who had been expecting a guest. She pulled over and cut the engine. The silence that followed was different from the one she had first encountered here. It was not empty. It was full. Of peace. Of potential. She got out of the truck. She wore jeans and a simple cotton shirt. The city armor was gone. The farmhouse door opened and Maya ran out. She did not hesitate. She ran straight to Elara and wrapped her small arms around her legs. The hug was fierce, absolute. Elara stood frozen for a moment, an unaccustomed warmth spreading through her chest. Then, slowly, her hand came to rest on the girl's tangled hair. Maya pulled back and held up a piece of paper, a new drawing. It was not a tree this time. It was a house, the farmhouse, and on the porch, 3 figures, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with dark hair. They were all holding hands. Elara's throat felt tight. She looked from the drawing to Liam. He was watching them, a small, barely there smile on his lips. It was the first time she had seen him smile. It changed his entire face. It erased the grief and left only a quiet strength. She walked over to the fence line where he stood. There were no grand declarations, no speeches about the future. Their shared battle was over. The silence that remained was for them. He held out a tool, a wire stretcher. His hand was steady. She took it. Her fingers brushed against his. It was the first time they had touched. A spark, quiet and warm. Not a jolt of electricity, but the slow, sure heat of a banked fire. They worked, side by side in the late afternoon sun, mending the broken line. The rhythm was easy, unspoken, a shared task, a shared peace. This was not an ending, it was a beginning, a foundation built not on concrete and steel, but on something far more solid, something real. Some fences are built to keep things out. Others are built to let the right things in.